The terrible session, which destroyed all my nerve cells, was over, and summer began. Long-awaited freedom from all the bad things. Of course, at sea or in Egypt was not going to. Every summer to my grandmother in the village visited. I helped with the house, with the vegetable garden and other things. And I wasn't the only one. Besides me, a young girl also came to my grandfather's house to help. Her name was Nastya, Grandfather Maksimich, a master of all hands and a kind-hearted man. His granddaughter is always happy, because the only relative who still visits him from time to time. And indeed, there is something to be proud of. A sportswoman, a Komsomol member, and simply beautiful. I even found the courage to talk to her. And we got a little closer during our acquaintance. A little bit about the village is worth telling. Though it is nothing, the village is like a village, which are still plenty in Russia. There are few houses, old and wooden. You can count on your fingers, so everyone knows each other. Friendly rows stand. If you go to the end of the village, you can meet a dead end of dilapidated houses. This cul-de-sac is headed by Ded Maximich's house, and not far away is my grandmother's house. Mostly old people live there, and only Nastya and I are young people, and that's for the summer, when we come to visit and help. The roads are country roads, with big holes, asphalt only before the entrance to the village from the highway, and then it's a roller coaster. You are afraid that your car will be torn apart for parts when you get to the village. I might add that we have a small grocery store just before we enter the village. So it was time for vegetable gardening and evening walks. The first thing I decided to do was to visit Nastya and invite her for a walk. The door was opened to me by Ded Maximich. He let me into the house while Nastya was getting ready. He gave me tea with a special herbal decoction. We talked a bit about life, about soccer, about the car industry. We partially mentioned the subject of my relationship with Nastya. I immediately blushed and began to brush the conversation aside. It was awkward for me, but Ded Maximich went on and on, sometimes joking and laughing. When Nastya appeared, I breathed a sigh of relief. After saying goodbye to Grandpa, Nastya took me under her arm and led me to the exit. I also said something goodbye. Grandpa Maximich saw us off with a glance, smiling wryly. I was slightly frightened by this reaction. Is the old one looking at his granddaughter, or is he remembering his youth when he was chasing girls? But I didn't think about it for long. Once outside, I instantly forgot about Ded Maximich, tuning in to our so-called date with Nastya. We walked peacefully through the village, talking about this and that. We even went outside the village into the field and decided to be alone. There we continued our conversation, not noticing how quickly the time flew by. And now it was evening. The sun was hiding behind the horizon, lighting our way with the last rays of the sun. Saying goodbye to Nastya, I jogged home. Grandma had prepared a lot of things, thinking that I would come along with the girl. Of course, Grandma was sad that I came alone, so I had to eat everything myself. After a hearty dinner, I went up to my room, thinking about the next day's plans. Tomorrow I'm going to work in the vegetable garden until lunchtime. I should go to bed early, because I had to get up before dawn. I made myself comfortable and closed my eyes. In a couple of minutes, I fell into sleep. The next day began unpleasantly. From the very beginning, a commotion was raised. Nastya's missing! Grandfather Maximich was running all over the village, shouting this phrase. You ask, how? According to Grandfather's words, Nastya had gone out in the evening to get some fresh air, also to the store to buy groats, and disappeared with the ends. She never made it to the store. The whole village looked for her. They found nothing, not even a scrap of clothing, like she'd vanished into thin air. I was terrified. It was the first time I felt that awful feeling when someone you cared about disappeared. Resentment, anger, despair. A different spectrum of negative emotions were inside me, changing one by one. The police arrived from town an hour later. They too had combed the place and found nothing. Where and how could a young girl go missing in a small village in the middle of the forest? There were no bears, no wolves. It's mystical. At this difficult moment, we all forgot our business. We gathered near dead Maximich's house to support him. How many bitter tears he shed. I felt sorry for Grandpa because Nastia was his only support. They remembered him all day long. The next day, relatives came to see Grandpa Maximich. A lot of multicolored foreign cars piled up near the gate. The crowd hung around the house, swearing and talking. Many people came out of their houses to support Maximich because the dazed relatives were ready to kill him for not looking after his granddaughter. Anna, Nastia's mother, stood out among the crowd of angry relatives. She was chasing all the dogs on her grandfather, accusing him of all mortal sins. She looked accordingly. This aristocrat, in a gray coat to the knees, black tight pants, the figure came out, but the face so was plastered that without tears cannot look without tears, as if in the circus clown was going to act. And this lady was the initiator of all the yelling and violence. As soon as she was restrained, she still got out and flew to dead Maximich. And again they grabbed her and restrained her, and so it went on in a circle, as if in a jammed tape. Ours threatened the evil aunt that if she didn't leave Maximich alone, she would have to deal with the police. As soon as the law enforcement officers were mentioned, she immediately changed her behavior. She became calm and nice. She approached the white Chevrolet with the words, "We have nothing more to do here. Let's go." Everyone gathered went back to their cars. The engine roar of the many foreign cars drowned out all sound. Everything was quiet when they all drove away. "Grandpa Maximich, are you all right?" I asked him, coming up to him. "Bastards," quietly murmured grandfather, waving his hand in the direction of the departing relatives. After that incident, everything calmed down for a while. For a long time, they still remembered Nastia's disappearance, grieved that such a beautiful and hard-working girl just took and vanished, as if she had vanished through the earth. Maybe she had really vanished? Grandfather Maximich couldn't get over what had happened. He locked himself up in the house, didn't want to talk to anyone, abandoned the farm. We all tried to support him, to help him in any way, but he only waved away and slammed the gate. He even touched the bottle a little. We thought that now grandfather would get completely drunk. They couldn't do anything, so they just left him alone. And there was a fuss again. It was like this. Dead Maximich's relatives came to see him again, this time with the police. The same Anna who tried to beat up Maximich decided to show up at night. She left her car right at the entrance to the village and went to her grandfather's house on foot. The case is murky. The relatives did not say something about the motive for the arrival of Nastia's mother, but the police realized that she came with bad intentions. And why at night? I don't understand. The police stood around, listened, and assumed that she went to the woods to look for her daughter. Sounds strained and silly, but they needed an excuse to keep the crazy crowd away. The grandfather himself was watching what was going on, standing behind the fence that separated him from the angry relatives. But then one of the relatives could not stand it. Some type rushed to the house of Grandpa Maximich, banging on the fence. Of course, the wood was flimsy, a few strong blows, and part of the fence fell to the ground. A crowd of dazed relatives marched on to the grandfather's property. The police tried to stop, but to no avail. The madness proved stronger against the two men in uniform. Maximich himself got a little nervous. The crazy family searched the house, vegetable garden, attic and basement. Nothing. The only thing left was the barn, locked with a weighty lock. The relatives were going there, but dead Maximich blocked their way. His knees were trembling. He tried to say something, but only mumbled something inarticulate. At that moment, it became clear to everyone. The police joined the invasion. They asked grandfather to open the barn. Maximich shook his head and refused, but they pressed him hard, and he gave in. With trembling hands, dropping the keys every now and then, the grandfather unlocked the lock and opened the door. The barn smelled of rot and iron. A small swarm of flies flew out of there. The policeman went in first, followed by a few relatives. Inside the barn, it was semi-dark. The walls were covered with something red. A few sacks were lying in a corner, flies flying around them and maggots swarming from below like the first snow. Next to those bags was a corpse, an unusual corpse. The torso and legs belonged to Anna, and the arms and head belonged to Nastya. The joints were so carelessly sewn up that they were about to fall off. A white pockmark of Opa horses had already formed in them. Anna's withered eyeballs stared blankly at those who entered. The corpse was practically decomposed. It was dragged with difficulty then, placed in an ambulance. It was all happening too fast. Nothing could make sense of it. Grandpa Maximik was tied up and taken away. Interrogations, investigation. Then a lull. Since then, there's been no sign of dead Maximik, and we weren't interested ourselves. Only rumors that Maximik was going to create the perfect woman. He was obsessed with occult sciences, thus deciding not only to create his ideal woman, but also to resurrect his wife by putting her soul in a vessel. He loved his wife too much that even after her death he could not recover, even went crazy if he went to such a thing. About that Frankenstein of Anna and Nastya, it was explained by the fact that Nastya's mother had a great figure and slender legs, but the face did not turn out, and crooked hand, but Nastya all the opposite. But these are just rumors. It's up to each of us to believe them or not. I hope you understand what was in the bags. Maximich kept the remains of his brainchild in them. What about me? It took me a long time to get over what happened. I had to return to the city earlier than usual, see a psychologist, and spend sleepless nights alone. Losing someone you love is the worst thing that can happen in life. On the one hand, I understand dead Maximich, but on the other hand, to deprive other people of their lives, it's immoral for me. I managed to overcome the loss, but there was still an emptiness inside after the loss of Nastya. Now it's hard to love someone else for fear of loss. I don't want to leave open wounds on my heart and experience all the horror that happened then in the village.